Okay, we're going to talk about a dark page of human history, the American slave trade. As a result of Europeans coming over to the New World, they needed cheap labor, and the people of Africa were extorted for this. So we're going to take a look at we're going to examine the conditions faced by African slaves during what's called the Middle Passage. Okay, arrival in Europe, the Europeans in Africa in 1795. Okay, African people were rounded up and taken as slaves onto ships from European ships like the Portuguese and the Spanish and the English. And these Africans were treated as if they were property. They were inspected for sale. They would make sure that they tried to get the best specimens for the best workers. So the Middle Passage across the Atlantic Ocean was from West Africa to the Americas, Central America, and into the new colonies, and also South America. Okay, the men who fastened irons on the mothers took the children out of their hands and threw them over the side of the boat, ship into the water. Two of the women leaped overboard after their children. One of the two women was carried down by the weight of her irons before she could be rescued, but the other was taken up by some men in the boat and brought on board. This woman threw herself overboard one night when we were at sea. So what happened to each of the women above, and why did it happen? Okay, one woman drowned trying to save her baby after it was thrown overboard. The other woman, who had also jumped overboard to save her baby, was rescued. However, she jumped overboard again, committing suicide. Okay, these were not luxury ships. They were packed in, the slaves were packed in like sardines. The slave ship with 482 people was packed on deck. Many of them died of disease or starvation, exposure. Sometimes the boat would weigh too much and they would be forced to throw over cargo, which would be slaves. So that's what kind of happened with the slaves. So. Africans were crowded and chained aboard these slave ships, stacked as you can see here, defecating, urinating on one another. Okay, this is taken from a surgeon aboard the slave ship. He says the excessive heat was not only a thing that rendered their situation intolerable. The deck, that is, the floor of their rooms, was so covered with the blood and mucus which had proceeded from them in consequence of the flux that it resembled a slaughterhouse. Okay, a lot of the females were raped. The men whipped and beat the slaves amongst the slave ships. Exercise being deemed necessary for the preservation of the healthy, they sometimes obliged to dance when they were, the weather would permit. They're coming on deck. If they go about it reluctantly or do not move agilely, they were flogged, which means they were beaten. A person standing by them all the time with a cat of nine tails in his hand. Guys, a cat of nine tails was a whip that had shards of glass and hooks and things that would go into the skin of the person being whipped and actually rip flesh off of the body. And we are seeing an artist's rendition of the slaves being beaten and thrown overboard. Okay, heading for Jamaica in 1781, the ship Zong was nearing the end of its voyage. It had been 12 weeks since it had sailed from the West African coast with its cargo of 417 slaves. Water was running out. Then, compounding the problem, there was an outbreak of disease. The ship's captain, reasoning that the slaves were going to die anyway, made a decision. In order to reduce the owner's losses, he would throw overboard the slaves thought to be too sick to recover. The voyage was insured, but the insurance would not pay for the sick slaves or even those killed by illness. However, it would cover slaves lost by drowning. The captain gave the order. 54 Africans were chained together, thrown overboard. Another 78 were drowned over the next 2 days. By the time the ship had reached the Caribbean, 132 persons had been murdered. Okay, we are going to watch a clip in class from the movie Amistad, which is very violent, but the depiction, the Hollywood depiction of the slave ship Amistad, very similar things. I was soon put down under the decks, and there I received much of a salutation to the nostrils that I have experienced in my life, so that with the loathsomeness of the stench and crying together, I became so sick and low that I was not able to eat, nor had at least the desire to taste anything. I now wished for the last friend death to relieve me, but soon, to my grief, the white men offered me eatables, and on my refusing to eat, one of them held me fast in my hands and laid me across, and I think the windness and tied my feet, while the other flogged me severely. Here the Africans would be taken to the Caribbean and the New World to be sold into slavery, just like an auctioneer would auction off cattle or anything like that. Okay, diseases such as dysentery, malaria, and smallpox killed thousands of Africans. 13% to 20% of Africans aboard the slave ships died during the Middle Passage. Okay, between 1699 and 1845, there were 55 successful African uprisings on slave ships.